समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Why should we even be talking about a tiny country called Venezuela? Tiny, not in area, it's about 1/4 the size of India, but just about less than 3 crore population. So you can see how thinly populated. We can afford to talk about Venezuela for a bunch of reasons. Number one, because you are also forgiving. You let me take you to regions or countries that sound esoteric, but that have significance for us, and that most of our media tells us nothing about. Second, I do it because you are forgiving, and that allows me to be curious, and to stay interested, to read up and learn about new regions, new countries, new issues, new problems, new prospects, new possibilities. And third, we should talk about Venezuela simply because Donald Trump is so much, quote unquote, in love with Venezuela. Because Donald Trump, since he's come to power, he has run his politics, his power projection is all about beating up the much weaker side, which cannot retaliate. So he went after Colombia in a way earlier. Then he went after immigrants from India. He sent them back in chains and handcuffs. That was one incident. That was a rude message being conveyed. But more importantly, in his neighborhood, he first tried to push Panama around by talking about the canal, by asking for a change in the control on the canal, and got some amendments there to the rules, etc. Then he renamed the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. That was all local dadagiri against much smaller nations who had no power to counter him any which way. So even on trade, if he doubled your tariff, they would not dare to counter him. His method, therefore, has been to target the weakest. Even in the Israel-Iran conflict, as Fareed Zakaria then wrote, looks like he was getting the fear of missing out, FOMO. So at the last moment, when you knew that fighting was about to be over, that Israel was mostly done with its bombing, that he went ahead and carried out his own bombing as well, because he knew that Iran had no capability to retaliate against the Americans, against his forces. That's the method he has followed. Following the same method, he's now chosen his target, and his target is tiny Venezuela. Tiny for population, I told you, not tiny for area, because Venezuela itself is a very substantive Latin American country. Venezuela, see the map of Southern America again. It has Colombia to its west, Brazil to the south, Guyana to the east. Guyana, by the way, which has also found recently very large stores of offshore oil, and that is the territory, the adjoining territory that Venezuela laid claims to. Because once you get the territory, then you get exclusive economic zone as well. So they've also been eyeing that offshore oil. However, the Guyanese are quite secure there. It's a country that's been there for almost 200 years, earlier as part of a larger coalition or a larger alliance, maybe a larger merged entity called Grand Colombia. It's also the land of Bolivarian revolution, the first Bolivarian revolution, led by Simon Bolivar. So Simon Bolivar was a great revolutionary, one of the greatest revolutionaries of the 19th century. In fact, he was leading a humongous revolution and freeing up multiple countries in Latin America from Spanish occupation in the early 19th century. He was born in 1783 and died in 1830. So he lived all of 47 years. That was a lot of work to do in just 47 years of age. He died of tuberculosis in 1830, not in battle. He liberated these multiple countries, and at one point, one after the other, in 1824, 1825, and then on, they came together as it led this great revolution, storied revolution that is still talked about. And mind you, this was not a communist revolution. This was almost 100 years before any communist revolutions broke out elsewhere in the world. And Simon Bolivar was not a communist. He was, if anything, a centrist. He freed up so many countries, and under his influence, many of them came together, so they became one much larger entity called Grand Colombia or Gran Colombia, GRAN, because everything gets rendered in Spanish in those parts. So there was Colombia to begin with. Peru joined it in 1824, Bolivia in 1825, then Venezuela, then New Granada, and then Ecuador. So all of them, this big humongous landmass then, on one side of which was the Pacific, on the other side the Caribbean Sea. This became Grand Colombia. This in the course of time then broke up, countries separated. Venezuela became one independent sovereign country. However, the Bolivarian influence stayed. So even today, Venezuela's currency is called Bolivar and Bolivia's currency is called Boliviano. Also, there are two countries named after Simon Bolivar. Bolivia is one. Obviously, the other one is Venezuela. Why? It's called the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. He was held in such high esteem by many other states, particularly by many other states coming out of colonialism, that they all honor him. Even in Delhi, in the toniest part of Delhi, I would say, in Chanakyapuri, this is the road at right angles joining the Sardar Patel Marg, the big artery, with Vande Mataram Marg. New Delhi also has an important avenue named after Simon Bolivar. That's all the more reason we should talk about Venezuela, although that's more to do with history and some bit of revolutionary romanticism. However, the children of that revolution have lately been ruling Venezuela. Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez was a leftist. Remember, Hugo Chavez and his successor now, Nicolas Maduro. These are not communists. These are just strongman, hard socialist states with communist characteristics. They've carried out massive nationalizations. They've controlled a lot of things in their economy. They've ruined their economy despite having so much oil. And yet, you have private property in Venezuela. You also have quite a bit of the market operations still going on, free market operations still going on. So this is not a classical communist state. However, in 1992, he tried to stage a coup against the president then, who was Carlos Perez. He was friendly with America. That coup failed. However, in an election, Hugo Chavez, on his very deep pink agenda, he came to power, and then after that started a wave of reform, which is also described as a Bolivarian revolution. That's when he carried out massive nationalization of the private sector, particularly all of the oil industry. He also did many other nutty things because, like all strongmen, he was suspicious of everything. And his advisors on most issues, as for Maduro, his successor, were the Cubans, who also drummed a lot of suspicion in his head. So what happens is, when you build a national security state, often, or I would say inevitably, it also ends up becoming a national suspicion state. That's what happened under Chavez and continues till now. It became such a suspicious state that they always worried about the possibility of some general challenging them or carrying out a coup. In 2002, a coup was attempted against Chavez. It failed, it succeeded for all of 2 days. After that, he doubled up on the process of securing himself through hyper suspicion. In the process, within his armed forces, he created a hub and spoke system. Let me try and describe it for you. You are today a company commander, or maybe you are a captain, a platoon commander. I make you a general. You are a general and you have this 35 troops reporting to you, a bit like that. So he made so many generals that nobody would have overarching power over any sizable body of his troops. In the process, the situation as it exists now is that in armed forces of 1,30,000 or thereabouts, precise figures are not available, about 1,30,000, there are 2,000 with the rank of general or admiral. Because you know what? Hub, the general or admiral is the hub, and then you have these spokes around it. That is the kind of unique system that Venezuela has. Now, why is it that Trump is going after it? And what has Trump done? On September 2 this year, US aircraft attacked a boat with 11 people, a Venezuelan boat with 11 people, and killed all of them. Americans said they did so because these were drug smugglers. How did they figure that a boat with just this many people so far away from American coast territorial waters had intended to smuggle drugs into America? That evidence nobody has. But they nevertheless went ahead and blew up this boat. On September 15, they did this again. They blew up yet another boat. In this case, 3 were killed. After that, Trump put out a post on Truth Social celebrating this, along with a 27-second video also showing this boat being blown up and drowning. This drew a lot of criticism from the Democrats in America, who said that the legal basis of carrying out these attacks was completely dodgy, because you cannot just go and kill foreigners in international waters like that. But Trump is not to be bothered. Maduro responded to this with defiance. The latest example of that was, besides verbal defiance, was a set of military exercises that he carried out just today, that is on Friday this week, in Caribbean Sea, not far from Puerto Rico, which is American territory. So he's fighting back, as is his nature. In fact, after Trump came to power, routinely US administrations had a bounty on Maduro's head. So Biden administration had a $25 million bounty on Maduro's head. When Trump came to power, he doubled it to 50 million. Now, America and Venezuela have a funny relationship. They don't like Venezuela because for a long time, left-wing governments have been ruling it. Now, they may not be classical communist states. In some ways, they are much worse than those. But their allies are Russia, China, Iran, all the countries that either are seen as rivals by America or which are sanctioned by America. Again, unlike Chavez, Chavez was more in control, and for much of his tenure, the economy was not doing so badly because mostly oil prices were up and the damage done by his policy had not yet begun to show. That's the reason he won his election in 98, then in 2006, then he had won his election in 2012 as well, although he had a severe form of cancer by then. He was undergoing treatment in Cuba. He died the following year and his vice president Maduro took over after him. Now, the combination of these hyper-populist policies from Chavez to Maduro, these led to what Venezuela unfortunately became most famous or infamous for. That is hyperinflation. In this period, 2 countries in the world had hyperinflation. One was Zimbabwe. They kept on knocking zeros off their currency, and there were pictures saying you have to take money in a wheelbarrow to buy a box of detergent, stuff like that. But something like that happened because in Venezuela in 2018, if inflation had gone up to 1.7 million%. It's not even worth counting. In 2019, interannual, on some particular point in the year, it was always high through the year, but at one particular point, it became 3,44,510% inflation, which means money had long ceased to have any value. Even today, looks like it has moderated, but it is 229%. We just had our inflation go up to 2.1%, and you saw those headlines saying consumer inflation in India goes up after a long time. It doubles from the previous period from 1.2% or so to 2.1%. In this case, in Venezuela now, it is moderated to 229%. By that time, Venezuela's economy had begun to go really bad because oil prices had multiple shocks. They had fallen. Venezuelan oil is of a particular type. It is much thicker, much more dense, much more viscous. So only some refineries in the world can refine it, notably also the Reliance refinery in Jamnagar. You need specialized refining operations. You also need specialized extracting operations. So the Americans, to keep the global oil prices in check, have routinely banned Venezuelan oil, the largest source of oil in the world, but they've also allowed some of it as long as one of their own companies is pulling it out. That's how Chevron was given a permit by Biden to keep pulling out some oil in Venezuela. When Trump came in, he let that permit lapse, and yet a month later, he renewed that permit as well. So this complex love-hate relationship goes on between the US and Venezuela. Now, what is Trump's charge sheet? Why is he attacking Venezuela? Venezuela poses no military threat to him, to the US. It is very far. First of all, he says Venezuela is a source of a lot of illegal immigration. Now, it is true that as Venezuela's economy cracked up completely, particularly in the last 10 years or so, tens of thousands of Venezuelans, maybe hundreds of thousands, have left the country and gone overseas, mostly to the US. Now, many of those were among the first that Trump deported. However, too many of them have already merged with the local population. They are naturalized, or they have work permits, or they are needed on the American farms and American factories and urban services, urban and rural services as low-cost labor. That is one pain point with Trump. The other pain point, which a lot of the experts would say is exaggerated, is that Venezuela is primarily responsible for drug smuggling into America, drug trafficking, drug smuggling, arms smuggling into America. Now, the fact is that all data tells us that most of the cocaine coming into America, hardly any cocaine is produced in Venezuela. However, it's possible that some of it is being transshipped from there because Venezuela is poorly governed. And indeed, when Trump wants to go after any country, he accuses it of fentanyl smuggling. Remember, he used that charge against Canada to up their tariffs and then to continue inviting Canada to become his 51st state. Hardly any fentanyl comes in from Canada, but he used that excuse against Canada. He's using that reasoning with Venezuela as well. Even there, if you look at data available from international agencies, 74% of the cocaine is coming from the Pacific Ocean side. Venezuela has no direct access to Pacific Ocean, and only 24% from the Caribbean Sea. That is where Venezuela has access, as to some other countries as well. So this whole charge sheet against Venezuela looks like a hurried job. It's basically paint a target on a country's back and go after it, also knowing that that country has no wherewithal to respond to you either militarily or by denying you something, as the Chinese have done with rare metals, or politically. We also need to understand just who is Nicolas Maduro, because for a man to stand in the line of fire like this, when his country itself is on fire, definitely the economy is on fire, he's living in a very hostile neighborhood. In fact, after he was seen to have completely hijacked his 2024 election, and I will tell you what happened then, even his leftist neighbors, that is, even Lula of Brazil and Gustavo Petro of Colombia, they also distanced themselves from him. So he's more or less friendless in that neighborhood. I told you that he took over the presidency from Chavez. He was Chavez's deputy. Chavez was quite a hero in the leftist world. In fact, after the UPA came to power in India, Chavez was invited to India. The UPA government feted him grandly. Remember, then UPA 1 depended on the outside support of the left. So the left hosted him also. Besides Government of India, there was a big reception held for him at the JNU, where people young and old looked like a revolution had broken out, red salute, like that. He was quite a hero. But in his time, the decline started. Maduro took over from him because Chavez died of cancer. Maduro is just 62 now. He's a follower of Satya Sai Baba. There is a picture of Maduro and his wife in 2005. They must have come with Chavez in 2005, touching the Satya Sai Baba's feet. According to Venezuelan newspapers, he also keeps a picture of Satya Sai Baba in his office. So once again, that puts questions on him being a communist. As I told you, these are not communists. These are hard socialists of the strongman right. I know it's very convoluted, but I can probably use that expression. He was a bus driver and a trade union leader, got his ideological training in Cuba, and while his country has many weaknesses, he has developed one skill, and that has become his strength. That is rounding up any number of foreigners, particularly Americans, even dual passport holders, Venezuelans who might have an American passport as well. He locks them up and keeps them for periodic exchanges with the Americans for the Venezuelans that the Americans may be holding prisoner. The last exchange was not under Biden administration. It was just this July. And that was just before Chevron's license was renewed to start pulling out oil yet again from Venezuela. So all this is very interesting. But the fact is that the net result of this is not just the hyperinflation that I spoke about, but as a consequence of that hyperinflation, in 11 years, Venezuela has lost 75% of its GDP. Other countries count their GDP growth. Venezuela has been losing its GDP. 75% is gone. It has also lost 1/4 of its population, which has migrated to other countries. In the middle of all this came the election of 2024, and Maduro decided under no circumstances was he going to lose. So what did he do? He realized that in opinion polls and trends, he was trailing far behind. Now, people like him cannot afford to be out of power. So you don't lose power. So the first thing he did was he carried out the Imran Khan action. He learned from the Pakistani army, and just as they had banned Imran Khan, the most popular candidate in Pakistan, from contesting, he also banned the most popular candidate in Venezuela from contest. That is Maria Corina Machado. She was banned from contesting. Opposition was only allowed to have a candidate that nobody had heard of. And yet people came out to vote and looked like that Maduro was still going to lose. What did he do? He hijacked the election. He did not let anybody else announce the election. He did not share any counting sheets, result sheets with anybody. No international organization accepted his election. He just notified his own victory. Now, before I let you go, I have to tell you my own tiny Venezuela story. No, I didn't go to Venezuela, but in May 2000, that is 25 years ago, in May 2000, that was in the period that a lot of Miss Indias were becoming Miss Universe, Miss World, and there was wide celebration, including by the Vajpayee government, of that fact. It was being made to sound like India had arrived just because so many Indian women were winning these titles. So I wrote this national interest, headlined Venezuelization of India. So why Venezuelization? That's because Venezuela used to produce a lot of Miss Worlds, Miss Universe, Miss Earth, these beauty contestant winners. Look like they had an assembly line of these coming out one after the other. And that was used to create national pride. And I said India was heading in the same direction, not worrying about its own economy, which was stalling at that period of time. And just to be a little cheeky and maybe politically correct by today's standards, because we were talking about these beauty queens and a celebration about them, I quoted from that song Mambo Number 5, which was very popular at that point. A little bit of Monica in my life, a little bit of Erica by my side, so on and so forth. And you know what happened? My column appears, National Interest appears, as you know, on Saturday. On Monday morning, I got a call from the Venezuelan ambassador, who said that, look, my country doesn't just produce beauty queens. My country produces much more. There is much more to my country. I would like to come and explain to you. So I felt very bad, very embarrassed. I said, yes, Excellency, we'd love to welcome you. And then my embarrassment only got compounded because the ambassador came. The ambassador was in a wheelchair. And I worked from the Indian Express office at that point in South Delhi, which had 3 floors. My office was on the 3rd floor, but the fact was that building was without a lift. So there was no way we could haul that wheelchair up to any of the floors. So I had to meet the ambassador outside. And then I said, I will come to your embassy, maybe have a cup of coffee with you, which we did. I thought this was an interesting little story to tell you about Venezuela. I might even explain to you why I particularly got fascinated by this faraway country.